Hi, I'm Woody, welcome to Woody Minis. Let's get started kitbashing these Custodes Allarus Terminators with these fantastic Sylvaneth Kurnoth Hunters. They're both big chunky boys and I really want to work on these again. The centerpiece of this kitbash is going to be this piece here in the sprue, the Kurnoth Hunter's chest plate. It looks absolutely gorgeous. It's hollowed out, it's got a glowing seed inside, it comes in 3 parts so you've got to assemble it quite nicely and just push fitting it together. Both of these models are iconic and I'm going to need to be cutting up some pieces to make it all fit together. But before I do that, I'm just going to assemble the Allarus Terminator to this stage. After comparing the sizes, they look pretty similar and I've got an idea of where I need to cut both the torsos to stick them together. I'm going to use this little hobby saw piece and I initially thought, you know what, I'll just go for it. But the blade could slip quite easily, so instead I just scored a little mark of where I was going to cut with my hobby knife first. This was going to help guide the saw blade into the model and avoid any nasty slippages that could, impact my fingers, which would be a bit of a shame as I'm quite enjoying this Warhammer thing. I repeated the same process for the Kurnoth Hunter's part as well, and it didn't take too long before I could try attaching them together with a little bit of Tamiya extra thin. There is enough of a surface area here to form a strong bond, so I don't really need to worry about filing it down anymore or adjusting too many pieces. After holding it in place for a couple of seconds, it was all good to go. Next up was to remove all of the Custodes details on this cloak. I did that by scraping away with a hobby knife and then following it up with some foam sandpaper, fine grit to get it extra smooth. It wasn't quite too smooth, so I did add on some sprue goo at the end to smooth it out a bit. The parts fit together onto the legs, so it didn't require any extra steps to glue it onto the pieces here. Now this guy is a custodian and I guess he doesn't have any need for a crotch, but these tassels don't really fit in with my Sylvaneth Custodes army theme, so I'm going to cut them off with just a sprue clipper here, and it only took 2 quick cuts, a little bit of filing, and I could attach it onto the model. He looks like this, and he's looking sufficiently cursed to join the Woodstodes. Next up are the weapons, and I love the Custodes Guardian Spears and Axes, but these Kurnoth Hunters kits come with fantastic leaf-themed weapons, and I really want to add that scythe instead of this axe. It was simple enough to rip and tear this thing away, and just cleaning up the details with the hobby knife again by resting the edge of the halberd onto the cutting mat was simple enough. It didn't take too long, but the next part would be extra tricky. Yes, don't forget to drill your barrels. To make the next step a bit easier, I cut off most of the scythe and just lined it up with the gun barrel to find out where I'd need to cut. I followed the scoring marks and cut through it with my hobby knife to get the shape of the weapon so that it could easily attach like this. Afterwards, I wanted to really up the detail and I ended up trimming off the spike from the Guardian Spear, and instead I'd be attaching the haft of the Kurnoth Hunter's scythe. It's got a wicked look and it did take a little bit of sanding down to make a smooth connection point, but this was the result. Terminators need to be chonky and this guy's hips are lying to me. Sorry, Shakira. I'm going to need to make them a bit thicker with some green stuff. I rolled it into a thin strip and wrapped it around the body. Afterwards, I'm going to be blending it together using some sculpting tools, starting off with the metal tip one. It can be a bit of a rough shape because the wood's quite organic and flowy anyway, and the metal tool makes it a bit easier to just quickly move it on. Afterwards, around the front, I bended, pushed and prodded it until it looked like roots or part of a tree. After this, I smoothed out edges that were looking a bit rough with a silicone-tipped tool, and it also helped with blending it into the cape on the back side. It doesn't need to be perfect because I'll be adding some details to it later. Then I made 2 more of them. Looking good, boys? It was the end of day 1 and I had a lot of green stuff left over, so I thought I'd try Pete the Wargamer's trick of wrapping it in cling film and sticking it in the freezer to save for another day. The next day I made 2 more weapons using the spears instead of the scythes for my guy's friends, using the same method as previously. There were more pieces I'd need to use to add to the torsos to fit the theme, and these came in the Kurnoth Hunter's box and they just are supposed to fit on top of the torso like so. I assembled the heads and had a bit of a dilemma, which one to choose. In the end, I really wanted to lean into the more cursed look of my Woodstodes army theme, so I went with the Colonel Hunter heads and got out my green stuff from the freezer, and I wasn't quite sure what to believe or whether it would work, but you can tell that it's still soft, it's still malleable, and this was after a whole 24 hours. I used this leftover green stuff to attach the heads to the neck joints. This is because the intended model pose of the Colonel Hunters doesn't match how I want them to be holding their axes and scythes. I want a bit more creativity and a bit more posability with my models. I assembled the Custodes arms because I wanted them to be really easy to see. What you see is what you get, and used some more green stuff to just play around with the poses. I played around with the poses until I found some things that I liked, and once I was finished playing around and making them look all cool and badass and posable, I needed to score in some lines onto these shoulder joints to help them fit in with the Woodstodes theme, like some sort of woody tendrils coming from underneath the armour. And when I was testing out the pose for what would be my Allarus shield captain, I thought maybe I can turn this arm upside down and have him extending a hand, offering someone to join us. And speaking of joining us, if you want to, why don't you consider hitting that like and subscribe button? And after begging for more likes and subscriptions, I took off the grenade launcher from his wrist, and I was fully made up that I would slice it off, flip the wrist upside down, and have him extending a hand, join us Darth Vader style. Not only would this look pretty cool anyway, but it also fits in well with, the cursed, weird look that the Kitbashed army will have in the end. It wasn't too difficult to reattach this, just a little bit of Tamiya extra fin and a little twist of the wrist, and it was all good. Look at that, pretty perfect. Green stuff doesn't tend to hold on that well to the plastic bits, so I detached everything pretty easily and then used a bit of super glue on a toothpick to attach all of the limbs back together. This wasn't the end of the build though, as there are still some little greebly bits to attach. The next dilemma I had to face was, do I attach the Allarus Terminator shoulder pads, or do I attach the Colonel Hunter ones? In the end, I went with the bigger is better mentality and glued on the Terminator shoulder pads to get him looking extra thick. I did end up using the Silver F ones as the hip guards. These would help him balance out the body a bit more and make sure he looks as imposing as possible. It just took a little bit of super glue to attach him to the green stuff, but with that, the main Kitbash was complete, and I could move on to trying something new for the basing. If you've played with or against Custodians and they've brought their Allarus Terminators, they've got a cool ability called From Golden Light, which means they've got an uppy-downy once per battle, and I wanted to add a little deep strike effect to my model's bases. I did this by using my pin vise to drill 2 small holes into their 40mm bases. After that, I inserted small lengths of 2mm brass wire. I bended these wires around into a coiled shape. I'm imagining leaves and dirt flying out of the ground, followed by the arrival of these big chunky boys. This took a little bit of fiddling around to get the angles right, especially with how thin this wire is. I probably should have attached it first, but, live and learn. Of course, I did have to make sure that the models themselves could fit on the base. I didn't want to end up wasting all my time, and once I was sure it would work, I attached some green stuff to the bottom for some stability, and I then got the rest of my green stuff out and pulled it into a thin tapered point. The thick end went to the bottom and the thin end went around the top of the wires. I just folded it around a bit and stuck it down with a bit of force and added a few little curves so it wasn't too uniform. I improved the process by just holding the thick end onto the base and then pulling it up over the wire for the second attempt, and I thought it was looking quite nice. After the green stuff had cured, I used a very dirty old paintbrush to apply some texture paste, AK Terrain Light Earth diorama. Once it was all done, the base was complete and I could move on to painting. And to be honest, I have covered this in my previous videos a few times, and I don't really see the need to do it again, so instead I'm just going to spoil you all with a grand reveal. Whilst you take a look at these minis, I figure I'll just tell you about the paints I used. All of the base colours were done with contrast paints. The armour was done with a mix of skeleton horde and Guilliman flesh, stippled into a marble pattern. The gold is Balthazar gold coated with Nuln oil. All the wood of the model is done with Sylvaneth Wildwood contrast paint, and it's all been edge highlighted with just slightly lighter shades of those colours. The blades were done with fluorescence, and the chest piece was done with fluorescent green over a white ink. The tree's leaves on the back are done with tree moss powder. The little green bits you can see on his armour that are quite thin are just simple grass flock coated with pale tan green shade, and the leaves on the cape and on those wisps flowing up from the ground are just hobby leaves that are just used for miniatures, and they're pretty easy to find online. I hope you've really enjoyed these minis, and if you would like to see more, just hit the subscribe button. I might post some shorts later showing how I've done all of these individual models. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest.